The blue lights flashed behind Adrienne Blake's rental car as she pulled over on the quiet Georgia back road, never imagining that a routine drive to pick up her niece's graduation outfit would end with a decorated lieutenant general handcuffed and humiliated by two officers who saw nothing more than another black woman to put in her place. But Ray Mitchum and Logan Sharp had no idea they were about to make the costliest mistake of their careers, because the woman they mocked as General Oprah had actually earned those stars through 27 years of military service in the world's most dangerous places, and when she pressed the emergency signal on her smartwatch, she wasn't just alerting the Pentagon, she was setting in motion a chain of events that would expose a conspiracy reaching from small-town corruption all the way to the halls of Congress, and prove that sometimes the most important battles for American democracy are fought not on foreign soil, but on the back roads of your own hometown. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The Georgia sun hung low in the evening sky as Adrienne Blake pulled into the familiar driveway of her childhood home in Ashwood. The rental car's engine ticked as it cooled, and she sat for a moment, letting the memories wash over her. 27 years in the military had taken her to deserts, mountains, and foreign lands, but this small Georgia town still felt like the center of her world. She stepped out, her casual jeans and simple white blouse a stark contrast to the pressed uniforms that usually defined her presence. At 52, Adrienne carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned respect through action rather than words. Her short, natural hair caught the golden light as she grabbed her small duffel bag from the trunk. Adrienne! The front door burst open, and her sister Tanya rushed down the porch steps, arms wide. The embrace was warm and genuine, two sisters reconnecting after months apart. "Look at you," Tanya said, stepping back with tears in her eyes. "Still trying to save the world?" "One mission at a time," Adrienne replied with a soft smile that transformed her usually serious features. The sound of footsteps thundered from inside the house, and 17-year-old Autumn appeared in the doorway, trying to look cool, but failing to hide her excitement. "Aunt Addie!" Adrienne's military composure melted completely as her niece launched into her arms. "There's my college girl. You ready for graduation tomorrow?" "More ready now that you're here," Autumn said, her voice muffled against Adrienne's shoulder. They moved inside, where the scent of Tanya's famous cornbread filled the air. The house looked exactly as Adrienne remembered. Family photos covering every surface, her mother's quilts draped over furniture, and the old piano in the corner where she'd practiced scales as a child. "I can't believe my little sister is a general," Tanya said, shaking her head as they settled in the living room. "Mama would be so proud. She'd also tell me to stop tracking mud on her clean floors." Adrienne laughed, the sound rich and unguarded, in a way her subordinates rarely heard. They talked for hours, catching up on family news, Autumn's college plans, and Tanya's work at the local elementary school. Adrienne listened more than she spoke, savoring the normalcy of it all. Here, she wasn't General Blake. She was just Addie, the girl who used to climb the old oak tree in the backyard. As the evening grew late, Autumn mentioned she'd forgotten to pick up her cap and gown from the rental shop. "I'm such an idiot. They close early tomorrow and I need them for graduation." "Don't worry about it," Adrienne said, standing up. "I'll run out and get them." "Which shop?" "Ferguson's Formal Wear, over on Miller Road." "But you don't have to." "It's no trouble. I could use a drive anyway." Adrienne grabbed the rental car keys. "Besides, can't have my favorite niece graduating without proper attire." The drive through town stirred more memories. She passed her old high school, the church where she'd been baptized, and the corner store where she'd bought penny candy with her allowance. Ashwood had grown some, with a few new chain restaurants and a small shopping center, but it retained the sleepy charm of her youth. Ferguson's was located on a quiet stretch of Miller Road, surrounded by farmland and scattered houses. Adrienne collected the cap and gown, chatting briefly with Mrs. Ferguson, who remembered her from high school. The older woman beamed with pride when Adrienne mentioned her military service. "Your mama would be so proud," Mrs. Ferguson said, echoing Tanya's earlier words. A general, in our little town. Adrienne accepted the praise graciously, paid for the rental, and headed back to her car. The sun had fully set now, and the rural road was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the distant sound of traffic from the main highway. She chose the scenic back route home, enjoying the peaceful drive through farmland. The headlights illuminated rolling fields and old farmhouses, their windows glowing warmly in the darkness. This was the Georgia she remembered. Quiet, beautiful, timeless. The first sign of trouble appeared in her rearview mirror about 10 minutes into the drive. A police cruiser had appeared behind her, keeping pace but maintaining distance. Adrienne checked her speedometer. She was doing exactly the speed limit. Her military training kicked in automatically, heightening her awareness. The cruiser stayed behind her for another mile, then another. Adrienne felt her shoulders tense despite her attempts to stay calm. She'd experienced this before, the feeling of being watched, followed, judged. It never got easier. The blue lights flashed suddenly, cutting through the peaceful evening like a blade. Adrienne's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. She pulled over safely, turning on her hazard lights and rolling down her window. Her hands went to the steering wheel, visible and still. 2 officers approached her vehicle, their flashlights creating harsh circles of light in the darkness. The older officer, a heavy-set white man with graying hair, took the lead. His nameplate read Mitchum. His partner, younger and leaner, hung back slightly. Sharp was embroidered on his uniform. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Mitchum said without preamble, his tone already confrontational. Adrienne kept her voice, calm and respectful. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped? I was observing the speed limit and—" "I said step out of the vehicle," Mitchum repeated, his hand moving to his weapon in a gesture that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Don't make this difficult." "Sir, I'd like to understand the reason for the stop before. We've had reports of a stolen vehicle matching this description," Sharp interjected, though his voice lacked conviction. "Silver sedan, driven by a black female." Adrienne felt the familiar burn of injustice but kept her expression neutral. "Officers, this is a rental car. I have all the documentation. May I retrieve it from my purse?" Mitchum stepped closer to the window, his flashlight beam hitting her face. "Real slow and keep your hands where I can see them." Adrienne reached carefully for her purse, producing her driver's license, military ID, and rental agreement. She handed them through the window with steady hands. Mitchum barely glanced at the documents before handing them to Sharp. "Says here, she's military," Sharp said quietly. "Yeah, right," Mitchum scoffed. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Now." "Officer Mitchum, I'm Lieutenant General Adrienne Blake, United States Army. These documents verify my identity and—" Mitchum's laugh was harsh and ugly. "General? You?" He looked at Sharp. "Can you believe this? General Oprah here thinks she's something special." Adrienne climbed out of the car slowly, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Officers, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. If you'll just verify my credentials, turn around," Mitchum ordered, "hands behind your back." "This is unnecessary," Adrienne said, but she complied. The handcuffs clicked into place, cold metal against her wrists. "I've identified myself. As a United States military officer, I'm requesting to contact my commanding officer." "Yeah, right, General Oprah," Mitchum repeated, clearly enjoying his cruel joke. "You just sit tight. We'll sort this all out at the station." From across the road, hidden behind a cluster of trees, a young black man named Darnell Washington watched the scene unfold. He was walking home from his job at the gas station when he'd heard the commotion. What he saw made his blood run cold. A black woman, clearly no threat to anyone, being handcuffed and humiliated by 2 white officers. Darnell pulled out his phone and started recording, his hands shaking with anger and fear. He'd grown up in Ashwood and he knew the stories. He knew what happened to people who looked like him when they crossed certain lines. "Hey!" Mitchum shouted, having spotted the phone's light. "Boy, what do you think you're doing?" "Just walking home, sir," Darnell called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get over here. Now." Darnell approached reluctantly, still holding his phone. "I wasn't doing nothing wrong." Mitchum grabbed the phone from his hands and examined it. You recording us? It's my right to... The phone hit the asphalt with a sickening crunch as Mitchum threw it down and stomped on it with his heavy boot. Oops, he said with a cruel smile. Accidents happen. Now get out of here before you have your own accident. Darnell looked at the shattered remains of his phone, then at Adrian, who met his eyes with a look that seemed to say, "Remember this." He nodded slightly and melted back into the darkness. As they loaded Adrian into the back of the police cruiser, she activated the emergency function on her military-issue smartwatch. The device sent an encrypted signal directly to the Pentagon's Emergency Communications Center, a protocol reserved for the highest-ranking officers in extreme situations. The ride to the station was silent except for the crackling of the police radio. Adrian stared out the window at the familiar streets of her hometown, now transformed into something alien and hostile. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd served her country in war zones around the world, only to be treated like a criminal, in the place where she'd first learned to love America. At the Pentagon, the emergency alert triggered immediate action. Colonel Sarah Martinez, the duty officer in the communications center, stared at her screen in disbelief. The signal indicated a code black situation, a high-ranking officer in immediate danger. She immediately contacted General Harlan Reyes, the base commander, who was reviewing intelligence reports in his office. "Sir, we've received a code black signal from Lieutenant General Blake," she reported, her voice tight with concern. Reyes looked up sharply. "Adrienne Blake? Where's the signal originating?" "Georgia, sir. Small town called Ashwood." The signal cut out after the initial burst. "Get me Major Marks," Reyes ordered, his mind already racing through possibilities. "And prep a jet. If Adrienne Blake is in trouble, we respond with everything we have." Major Owen Marks had been reviewing after-action reports when his phone buzzed. The message was simple but urgent. "Phoenix Wing Conference Room, now." Owen had served under Adrienne Blake in Afghanistan, where she'd pulled him from a burning Humvee after an IED attack. He owed his life to her quick thinking and steady leadership. If she was in trouble, he'd move heaven and earth to help her. At the Ashwood police station, Adrian was processed with deliberate humiliation. Officer Sandy Gibson, the desk sergeant, barely looked up as Mitchum filled out the paperwork. "What's the charge?" Gibson asked in a bored tone. "Suspected vehicle theft, resisting arrest, and failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation," Mitchum rattled off. Adrian said nothing as they took her fingerprints and mugshot. The other officers in the station seemed to find the situation amusing, making comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Looks like somebody thought she was too good for a simple traffic stop," one said. "Probably thinks she's some kind of CEO or something," another added. They placed her in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and desperation. The radio in the main area played soft blues music, adding a surreal soundtrack to her humiliation. Adrian sat on the narrow bench and closed her eyes, centering herself the way she'd learned in survival training. Through it all, she maintained her dignity. She knew who she was, regardless of how they chose to see her. She'd served her country with honor for 27 years, commanded thousands of soldiers, and earned the respect of generals and presidents alike. No small-town bigot could take that away from her. As the minutes ticked by, she glanced at her watch and whispered to herself, "They're coming." Miles away, General Reyes was boarding a military jet, his jaw set with determination. Nobody treated one of his officers this way. The flight to Georgia would take less than 2 hours, but every minute felt like an eternity. The mountain air in Afghanistan had been thin and cold that October morning in 2018, but Adrienne Blake had barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on the mission, extracting wounded soldiers from a Taliban ambush that had gone sideways fast. The memory played in vivid detail as she sat in the holding cell. She'd been a colonel then, leading a special operations unit through hostile territory when they'd received the distress call. A convoy had been hit by an IED, followed by coordinated small arms fire. Multiple casualties, including several critical. "Phoenix Base, this is Eagle 6, she'd radioed back to headquarters. "We're moving to assist. Estimate arrival in 20 minutes. Her team had moved with practiced precision through the rocky terrain, suppressing enemy fire and creating an extraction corridor. That's when she'd found him, a young major trapped under an overturned Humvee, his leg crushed and bleeding badly. "Stay with me, soldier," she'd said, working quickly to stabilize him while bullets whined overhead. "What's your name?" "Marks, ma'am." "Owen Marks," he'd gasped through gritted teeth. "Well, Major Marks, today's not your day to die." She'd personally carried him to the extraction point, refusing to let anyone else take the burden despite the ongoing firefight. Owen had recovered fully, and their paths had crossed many times since. He'd risen through the ranks to become one of the Pentagon's most trusted intelligence officers, but he'd never forgotten the debt he owed to Adrienne Blake. Now, in the Pentagon's Secure Communications Center, Owen was working that debt with everything he had. "Sir, I've got nothing in the public databases," he reported to General Reyes via secure video link. The general was still in flight, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "No arrest records, no booking information. Either she hasn't been processed yet, or someone's keeping it quiet." "What about satellite coverage?" Reyes asked. "I'm accessing DoD surveillance assets now. Small town like Ashwood shouldn't be hard to map." Owen's fingers flew across multiple keyboards, calling up resources that most people didn't know existed. "Sir, I'm seeing her rental car at the police station. Confirmed location." "Any indication of her condition?" "Negative, sir. But the fact that she activated the Code Black protocol tells us everything we need to know." Back in Ashwood, Adrienne's situation was being observed by someone unexpected. Officer Nia Tucker had been on duty when they'd brought the woman in, and something about the entire scene bothered her. Nia was new to the force, barely 6 months out of the academy, but she'd grown up in Ashwood and knew the difference between actual police work and harassment. She'd noticed the woman's military bearing, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the circumstances. More importantly, she'd noticed the tattoos. During processing, Nia had caught glimpses of military insignia tattooed on the woman's arm, not the kind of amateur work you'd see on wannabes, but professional pieces that spoke of real service. There was an Army Ranger tab, a Special Forces crest, and what looked like campaign ribbons from multiple deployments. "Officer Tucker," Mitchum called out from the break room, where he and Sharp were holding court with several other officers. "Come here for a minute." Nia approached reluctantly. She'd learned to be wary of Mitchum's moods, especially when he was feeling proud of himself. "You see that woman we brought in?" Mitchum asked, gesturing toward the holding area with his coffee cup. "Yes, sir." "That's what happens when people think they're better than us," he continued, his voice carrying to the other officers. "Think they can just drive around in stolen cars and mouth off to police officers." "Sir, her documentation seemed to be in order," Nia said carefully, "and she was cooperative during processing." Sharp looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Several other officers nodded agreement with Mitchum's assessment, but Nia noticed that none of them had actually been present during the arrest. "Documentation can be faked," Mitchum said dismissively. "Point is, we put someone in their place tonight, sent a message." The conversation troubled Nia enough that she found an excuse to walk past the holding cells later in her shift. The woman, who'd identified herself as General Blake, sat perfectly still on the bench, her posture erect despite the uncomfortable accommodations. Their eyes met briefly, and Nia saw something that made her chest tight with recognition. It was the same look her grandfather had worn, a veteran's bearing that spoke of battles fought and responsibilities carried. Whatever else this woman might be, she was a soldier. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour. At the state level, Chief Barbara Stroud of the Ashwood Police Department was fielding increasingly urgent calls from officials who normally wouldn't give her small-town department a second thought. "Chief Stroud, this is Deputy Director Hamilton. From the governor's office," came the voice over her secure line. "We're getting inquiries about an arrest made by your department tonight. Can you clarify the situation?" Stroud, a career law enforcement officer who'd climbed the ranks through political savvy as much as police work, chose her words carefully. "We had a routine traffic stop that escalated when the suspect became uncooperative. Standard procedure was followed. The suspect claims to be a United States Army general. Sir, We get all kinds of claims: mental health issues, drug impairment, people trying to avoid consequences for their actions. My officers followed protocol. I see. Well, keep this quiet for now. We don't need unnecessary attention on local law enforcement. What Stroud didn't mention was that she'd already received 3 calls from Pentagon officials, each one more insistent than the last. Something about this arrest was different, and her instincts told her to prepare for a storm. Miles away, in Shiasatin, his cramped apartment, Darnell, Washington, was discovering that his broken phone might not be the end of his story. His friend Marcus, a tech student at the local community college, had managed to recover the phone's memory card from the shattered remains. "Bro, you're not gonna believe this," Marcus said, hunched over his laptop. "Your phone was backing up to the cloud in real time. The video's all here." Darnell watched the footage with growing amazement. The quality was grainy, but the audio was clear enough to understand the conversation. More importantly, the video clearly showed a woman being handcuffed without any sign of resistance or threat. "We need to do something with this," Darnell said. "Already, on it," Marcus replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm uploading to every platform I can think of: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, #LadyInCuffs. The video began spreading immediately, shared and reshared by accounts across social media. Within hours, it had been viewed thousands of times, though nobody yet knew the identity of the woman in handcuffs. Back at the Pentagon, Owen was making disturbing discoveries. His cybersecurity contacts had confirmed that the Ashwood Police Department security footage from the evening had been wiped. All of it, not just the arrest footage. "That's not accidental," Owen reported to General Reyes, who had landed at a military airfield outside Atlanta and was driving toward Ashwood in an unmarked vehicle. Someone with technical knowledge deliberately scrubbed their servers. "How long would that take?" "With the right access and tools, maybe 30 minutes. But sir, there's something else. I've been running background checks on the arresting officers. Ray Mitchum has a history. 3 excessive force complaints in the past 5 years, all dismissed. And he's got social media accounts that are concerning." "How concerning?" "White nationalist adjacent. Nothing overtly criminal, but he follows accounts that promote race-based conspiracy theories. And he's been active on forums discussing urban threats and maintaining order." General Reyes's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than he'd initially feared. At the police station, the night shift was winding down, but the tension remained high. Word had spread through the building that calls were coming in from state and federal officials, asking questions about the evening's arrest. Chief Stroud had arrived personally, which was unusual for a routine booking. She'd spoken privately with Mitchum and Sharp, then spent time reviewing the paperwork. "There seemed to be some irregularities in the documentation," she announced to the officers on duty. "I want everyone to be very careful about what they say regarding tonight's events. Any media inquiries are to be directed to me personally." Nia Tucker felt her stomach drop. In her limited experience, that kind of warning usually meant someone had screwed up badly. Around 3 a.m., a quiet phone call came from someone at the State Attorney General's office. The conversation was brief and coded, but the message was clear. The woman needed to be released, immediately and quietly. Stroud hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then she walked to the holding area herself. "Ma'am, you're free to go," she said through the bars. "Your vehicle is in the parking lot." Adrian stood slowly, her dignity intact despite the night's ordeal. "Am I being charged with anything?" "No. Charges are being filed at this time." "I see. And my property?" Stroud handed over a plastic bag containing Adrian's wallet, keys, and watch. "All accounted for." Adrian checked the contents carefully, then looked directly at the chief. "No apology?" "Ma'am, proper procedures were followed. You're free to go." As Adrian walked through the station toward the exit, she passed the break room where several officers sat in uncomfortable silence. Mitchum was nowhere to be seen, but Sharp met her eyes briefly before looking away. Outside, the media had begun to gather. Word of the viral video had reached local news outlets, and reporters were starting to piece together the location. "Adrian, emerged from the station to find 3 news vans and a small crowd of protesters who had materialized from social media calls. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but Adrienne simply walked to her rental car with measured steps. She ignored the chaos, started the engine, and drove away into the pre-dawn darkness. 20 minutes later, she pulled into her sister's driveway to find every light in the house on. Tanya and Autumn rushed out before she could even turn off the engine. "Oh my God, Addie, we've been so worried," Tanya said, tears streaming down her face. "We saw the video online, and then the news said you were arrested and—" Autumn wrapped her arms around her aunt and wouldn't let go. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Adrienne held her niece close, feeling the anger and humiliation of the past few hours beginning to transform into something else: determination. "I'm fine," she said softly. "But this was never about me, baby girl. It's about what's coming next." In the distance, the sound of helicopters could be heard approaching. Ashwood. General Reyes was 5 minutes out, and he was bringing the full weight of the United States military with him. The small town that had tried to humiliate a general was about to discover exactly who they had crossed. The morning after Adrienne's release, Chief Barbara Stroud stood behind a podium in the Ashwood Municipal Building, facing a room full of reporters and flashing cameras. She had called the press conference to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address the events of last evening," Stroud began, her voice steady and authoritative. "The Ashwood Police Department conducted a routine traffic stop based on a reported stolen vehicle matching the description of the car in question. Standard procedures were followed throughout the encounter." A reporter from Atlanta raised her hand. "Chief Stroud, the viral video shows what appears to be an unnecessary arrest of a cooperative individual. How do you respond to claims of racial profiling?" Stroud's expression remained neutral. "The video you're referring to shows only a small portion of the encounter. The individual in question was released after proper verification of her identity. We consider this matter closed. But what about reports that the arrested woman was actually a United States Army general? I cannot comment on the identity of individuals involved in ongoing investigations. What I can say is that this department treats all citizens equally, regardless of their claimed status or background." The word "claimed" was deliberate, designed to cast doubt on Adrienne's credentials. Stroud fielded a few more questions before ending the conference, but the damage to the narrative was already done. Social media exploded with outrage over her dismissive tone and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Later that morning, a black sedan with government plates pulled up to Adrienne's sister's house. Deputy Mayor Richard Hayes stepped out, adjusting his tie nervously. He was a career politician who had built his reputation on avoiding controversy, and this situation threatened to blow up in spectacular fashion. Tanya answered the door with obvious suspicion. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Mayor Hayes. I was hoping to speak with your sister about last night's unfortunate incident." Adrienne appeared behind Tanya, her expression unreadable. "I'm General Blake. What can I do for you?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. "General, first let me say how sorry I am about what happened. There's been a terrible misunderstanding and the city would like to make things right." "How exactly do you propose to do that?" "Well, we're prepared to offer a formal apology from the city, along with assurance that the officers involved will receive additional training. We'd also be willing to discuss compensation for your inconvenience." Adrienne studied him for a long moment. "Let me understand this correctly. You want me to accept an apology and some money, and in exchange I quietly disappear and pretend this never happened?" "I wouldn't put it quite like that, but, Mr. Hayes, I've worn this uniform for 27 years. I've served my country, in war zones around the world. I didn't do that so I could come home and be treated like a criminal in my own hometown." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "That won't happen." Hayes left empty-handed, and Adrienne knew the real fight was just beginning. That afternoon, she made a call to an old contact, Jeremiah Cole, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. Cole had a complicated past, having once worked for corporate interests before a crisis of conscience led him to advocacy work. "General Blake," Cole said when he answered. "I've been following your situation on the news. Hell of a thing. I need someone who's not afraid of a fight, Jeremiah. Are you interested?" "I'll be honest with you. They're going to come at you with everything they have. This isn't just about a traffic stop anymore. You've become a symbol, and symbols make powerful people nervous." "Good," Adrian replied. "Maybe it's time some people got nervous." Cole agreed to meet her the next day, but he warned her, "They'll try to bury you, General. Make sure you're ready for that." Meanwhile, the story was gaining national attention. Social media had identified Adrian from military websites and news articles about her distinguished service record. The hashtag #LadyInCuffs evolved into Justice for General, and support began pouring in from unexpected quarters. Black veterans organizations issued statements of support. Military families shared their own stories of discrimination. But the response wasn't uniformly positive. Alt-right websites and forums began spinning counter-narratives, painting Adrian as part of a deep state conspiracy against local law enforcement. At the Ashwood police station, the atmosphere was increasingly tense. Officer Nia Tucker had been watching the news coverage with growing unease, particularly after she'd done her own research into Adrian's military record. During her lunch break, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I'm telling you, we sent exactly the right message," Mitchum was saying to a group of officers in the break room. "These uppity types need to understand that their fancy titles don't mean shit in the real world. Ray, maybe you should keep your voice down," suggested Officer Davis, glancing nervously around. "Why? We did our job. Some elite thinks she can just roll through our town like she owns the place? Not happening." Nia quietly activated the voice recorder on her phone, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just about a traffic stop, it was about deliberate targeting based on race and perceived status. "The chief's got our backs on this," Mitchum continued. "She knows what really happened. Sometimes you got to put people in their place, show them that badges still mean something." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Mitchum making increasingly inflammatory comments about sending messages to the uppity elite. Nia captured it all, her disgust growing with every word. That evening, she sent the audio file to Sarah Williams, her college roommate who now worked as a journalist for the Atlanta Constitution. The email was simple. "Sarah, you need to hear this. People need to know what really happened." While Nia was documenting the corruption in her own department, Major Owen Marks was pursuing a different line of investigation at the Pentagon. His cybersecurity contacts had uncovered disturbing connections between Officer Mitchum and extremist online communities. "Sir, you need to see this," Owen told General Reyes as they reviewed intelligence reports. "Mitchum's been active on a militia-connected website called Iron Oak 88. He's posted dozens of times about targeting high-profile figures who he considers threats to traditional values. Define targeting. Posts about making examples of people who think they're above the law. There's discussion of coordinated harassment, economic pressure, and what they call street justice." Reyes studied the printed screenshots with growing alarm. "This suggests the arrest wasn't random." "No, sir, it wasn't. I've traced the web traffic patterns, and there's evidence that Mitchum was researching General Blake's family connections to Ashwood weeks before her visit. He knew she was coming. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a case of racial profiling during a routine traffic stop. It was a deliberate ambush targeting a specific individual because of her race and status. "Get me everything you can on this Iron Oak 88 group," Reyes ordered. "Financial records, membership lists, communication logs. I want to know who else is involved and how deep this goes." As Owen expanded his investigation, Adrian was preparing for her first major media appearance. She had agreed to an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper, despite warnings from some quarters that going public would only escalate the situation. The interview was conducted via satellite from a studio in Atlanta, with Adrian maintaining her characteristic poise throughout. Cooper began with straightforward questions about the arrest, but Adrian's responses elevated the conversation to broader themes. "This isn't about me personally," she said, looking directly into the camera. "This is about a system that allows people in positions of authority, to abuse that authority based on their personal prejudices. I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't end just because I'm wearing civilian clothes in my hometown. Some critics have suggested that you're using your military rank to receive special treatment, Cooper pressed. Anderson, I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for equal treatment under the law. The same treatment any citizen should expect when they're pulled over for no legitimate reason. Her voice remained calm, but her words carried weight. If demanding accountability for law enforcement officers who violate their oaths is special treatment, then we have a much bigger problem than one traffic stop in Georgia. The interview went viral within hours. Donations to a legal defense fund that Jeremiah Cole had established began pouring in from across the country. Military families, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens contributed millions of dollars in the first week alone. But the response wasn't entirely positive. Right-wing media outlets began attacking Adrienne personally, questioning her military record, and suggesting she was part of a political conspiracy against local law enforcement. Death threats began appearing on social media, forcing Tanya to temporarily close her school in autumn to increase security at her college. The situation reached a boiling point when Nia Tucker's home was vandalized in the middle of the night. She woke to the smell of smoke and found a 6-foot wooden cross burning on her front lawn, while racist graffiti covered her garage door. Her brother Marcus, a mechanic who worked the night shift at a local garage, arrived just as the fire department was putting out the cross. "Nia, you need to quit that job and get out of town," he said, his voice tight with fear and anger. These people aren't playing games. But Nia's response surprised him. "No, Marcus. I'm not running. If I quit now, they win. And I won't let them win." Instead of backing down, she called Adrienne directly, asking for a meeting. They met at a coffee shop in the next county, away from prying eyes in Ashwood. "General Blake, I need to tell you something," Nia began, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "What happened to you wasn't an accident. It was planned." Adrienne opened the envelope and found transcripts of the recorded conversations, along with screenshots of Mitchum's online activity that Owen had shared through back channels. "Officer Tucker, this took courage. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Nia nodded, though her hands shook slightly. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam. He used to tell me that sometimes you have to stand up even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. Then we stand up together." The Pentagon's executive conference room had seen its share of crisis meetings, but the tension in the air felt different as Adrienne sat across from a panel of senior military officials. General Patricia Morrison, the Army Chief of Staff, led the questioning while others listened with carefully neutral expressions. "General Blake, we need to discuss the implications of your current situation," Morrison began. "Some members of Congress are expressing concern about military officers becoming involved in civilian law enforcement controversies." Adrienne kept her voice level. "Ma'am, I was arrested while on personal leave in my hometown. I didn't seek this confrontation. Nevertheless, the optics are complicated. There are suggestions that your response has been disproportionate to the incident." "Disproportionate?" Adrienne's composure slipped slightly. "Ma'am, I was handcuffed and humiliated by officers who targeted me specifically because of my race and status. The evidence shows this was a coordinated attack, not a random traffic stop." General David Harrison, a veteran of 3 wars and someone Adrienne had considered an ally, leaned forward. "Adrienne, we all respect your service record, but this situation is creating tensions between military and civilian law enforcement that could have broader implications." "Sir, are you suggesting I should have remained silent?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the larger mission requires personal sacrifice. There are political considerations here that go beyond one incident." Adrienne felt the weight of institutional pressure bearing down on her. These were officers she'd served alongside, people who had praised her leadership and dedication. Now they were asking her to quietly accept injustice for the sake of political convenience. "Generals, with respect, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. That document guarantees equal protection under the law. If the military won't stand behind that principle when it's tested, what exactly are we defending?" The meeting ended without resolution, But Adrienne left knowing that her career was now at risk. Word had already reached her that her name had been placed on a conduct review list, military bureaucracy's way of signaling that someone had fallen out of favor. In Washington, Secretary of Defense Robert Walsh was dealing with pressure from multiple directions. Congressional Republicans were demanding that he rein in political activism within the military ranks, while Democrats were calling for investigations into systemic racism in law enforcement. Walsh had served in both Republican and Democratic administrations, building his reputation on avoiding partisan controversy. The Blake situation threatened to destroy that carefully maintained neutrality. "Sir, we're getting calls from senators on both sides of the aisle," his chief of staff reported during their morning briefing. "Senator Patterson wants to know why we're not disciplining General Blake for inflammatory public statements. Senator Williams wants to know why we're not doing more to support her." What's the White House position? They're staying out of it for now, but the president's advisors are concerned about the political implications heading into the election cycle. Walsh stared out his office window at the Potomac River, weighing his options. Adrienne Blake was one of the Army's most decorated officers, with a service record that was beyond reproach. But politics was politics, and sometimes good people became casualties of larger forces. "Schedule a meeting with General Blake," he decided. "I want to hear her side directly." Back in Ashwood, Chief Barbara Stroud was conducting her own damage control meeting. She had gathered her most trusted officers, including Mitchum, to discuss their response to the growing crisis. "The media attention is intense," she announced to the group assembled in the conference room. "We need to present a united front. This isn't about race, it's about respect for law enforcement and the rule of law." Officer Davis raised a tentative hand. "Chief, some of the evidence that's coming out suggests the arrest might have been problematic." Stroud's expression hardened. "Officer Davis, are you questioning the judgment of your fellow officers?" "No, ma'am, but the recordings, the social media posts—" "Alleged recordings," Mitchum interrupted. "Audio can be faked. Social media accounts can be hacked. We can't let ourselves be intimidated by a media witch hunt." Stroud nodded approvingly. "Ray's right. We followed proper procedures. If General Blake wants to make this about race, that's her choice. But we won't be bullied into admitting wrongdoing that didn't occur." She outlined their strategy. Deny everything, claim evidence was fabricated, and frame the situation as an attack on local law enforcement by out-of-state agitators. Several officers looked uncomfortable with the approach, but none voiced objections. "One more thing," Stroud added as the meeting concluded. "If anyone in this department is considering cooperating with outside investigators, they should remember where their loyalties lie. We protect our own." The message was clear: cross the department and face the consequences. While Stroud was circling the wagons, Jeremiah Cole was building his legal strategy in Atlanta. His investigation had uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior within the Ashwood Police Department that went far beyond Adrienne's case. "General, what we're looking at here is systematic misconduct," he explained during a strategy session at his law firm. "I've found 17 cases in the past 5 years where complaints against Ashwood officers were dismissed or buried. Most involved black citizens, and several mentioned Officer Mitchum specifically." Adrienne studied the files spread across the conference table. Each one represented someone who had been wronged and then ignored by the system. "There's more," Cole continued. "I've traced financial records showing that the police union has been paying legal fees for officers accused of misconduct across 4 counties. It's essentially a protection racket funded by taxpayer money." "Can you prove it?" "I'm working on it, but they're fighting back hard. Chief Stroud's attorney has already threatened to sue me for defamation if I make any public statements about ongoing investigations." "Let them sue," Adrienne said firmly. "The truth is the truth." Cole's investigation had also uncovered connections between the police union's legal defense fund and a network of attorneys who specialized in defending officers accused of civil rights violations. The same law firms appeared in cases across multiple states, suggesting a coordinated effort to shield bad actors from accountability. As the legal battle intensified, the personal costs were mounting for everyone involved. Nia Tucker had been effectively ostracized within the Ashwood Police Department, assigned to desk duty, and excluded from normal operations. Her fellow officers avoided her, and she found dead animals left on her doorstep twice in 1 week. But she refused to back down. Working with journalists and investigators, she had provided crucial evidence that corroborated Adrienne's account and exposed the department's culture of corruption. "I became a police officer to protect people," she told a reporter from the Washington Post. "Instead, I found myself working alongside people who were more interested in protecting their own power than serving the community." The stress was taking its toll on her family. Her mother begged her to quit and move away, while her brother worried constantly about her safety. But Naya had found something she'd been searching for her entire career, a cause worth fighting for. The case took a tragic turn when Officer Logan Sharp, Mitchum's partner during the arrest, was found dead in his apartment from an apparent suicide. The official report stated that he had been despondent over the media coverage and investigation, but Owen Marks, analyzing the evidence from his Pentagon intelligence resources, suspected something more sinister. Sharp had been scheduled to testify in a closed hearing about the arrest, and his death conveniently eliminated a key witness who might have contradicted the official narrative. "The timing is too convenient," Owen reported to General Reyes. "Sharp dies 3 days before his scheduled testimony, and the only evidence is a hastily written suicide note that doesn't match his usual writing style." "Are you suggesting he was murdered?" "I'm suggesting we can't rule it out." Sharp was reportedly nervous and told his wife he was being followed. Now he's dead, and the investigation loses its most potentially cooperative witness. Naya Tucker, when she learned of Sharp's death, felt a chill of recognition. She remembered seeing Sharp in the days after the arrest, looking haggard and jumping at every unexpected sound. He had tried to approach her once, seeming like he wanted to say something, but then changed his mind and walked away. Now she wondered if he had been trying to find the courage to tell the truth, and whether that courage had cost him his life. News of Sharp's death reached Adrienne while she was preparing for her meeting with the Secretary of Defense. The timing felt like another message: cooperate with investigations and face the consequences. But instead of intimidating her, it strengthened her resolve. She thought about all the soldiers she had commanded over the years, young men and women, who had trusted her to lead them through dangerous situations. Many of them had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country and its ideals. If they could give their lives for freedom and justice, she could risk her career for the same principles. The meeting with Secretary Walsh took place in his private office, away from the formal conference rooms where bureaucratic theater usually played out. Walsh was a career military officer who had earned his position through competence rather than politics, and Adrienne respected him despite their current circumstances. "Adrienne, I've known you for 15 years, Walsh began without preamble. "You're one of the finest officers I've served with. That's why this situation is so difficult. Sir, I understand the political pressures you're facing. Do you? Because I'm not sure you grasp how far this could go. There are people in Congress who want your head on a platter. They see you as a symbol of everything they oppose. Military officers who won't stay in their lane, civil rights activists who won't accept the status quo." Adrienne met his gaze steadily. "And what do you see me as, sir?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Washington skyline. "I see an officer who's been placed in an impossible position through no fault of her own. But I also see someone who has a choice to make about how this ends." "What choice is that?" "Accept a transfer to a non-controversial position. Take early retirement with full honors. Let this fade from the news cycle." He paused. "Or continue down this path and accept that your career may not survive the journey." Adrienne considered the offer carefully. It would be easy to take the exit ramp, to accept a comfortable retirement and avoid further conflict. She could write her memoirs, give speeches to veteran groups, and enjoy her grandchildren when they came along. But then she thought about Nia Tucker risking everything to stand up for what was right. She thought about Darnell Washington, whose quick thinking had provided the evidence that started this whole fight. She thought about all the people who had been wronged by systems that protected perpetrators instead of victims. "Sir, with respect, My career isn't the most important thing at stake here. Walsh nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. Then God help us all, because the storm is just getting started. As Adrian left the Pentagon that afternoon, she carried with her a sealed envelope containing intelligence reports that Owen had assembled. The contents would change everything, evidence that the network of corruption extended far beyond a small-town police department in Georgia. One name appeared repeatedly in the financial records and communication intercepts: Senator Roland Wexley, a powerful Republican with significant influence over law enforcement policy and military budgets. The arrest in Ashwood hadn't been a random act of prejudice. It had been the opening move in a much larger game, and Adrian was about to discover that her opponents included some of the most powerful people in Washington. Following her meeting with Secretary Walsh, Adrian knew she needed allies who understood the full scope of what she was facing. The sealed envelope from Owen had led her to an unlikely contact: Virginia Cross, a 72-year-old former CIA analyst who lived quietly in a Virginia suburb but maintained connections throughout the intelligence community. They met at a small diner in Alexandria, the kind of place where conversations could blend into the background noise of clinking coffee cups and quiet conversations. Virginia arrived first, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, looking like any other grandmother enjoying her afternoon coffee. "General Blake," Virginia said, as Adrian slid into the opposite booth. "I've been following your situation with great interest. Ms. Cross, Major Mark said you might have insights into the broader picture." Virginia's eyes were sharp despite her age. "My dear, what happened to you in Georgia wasn't an isolated incident. It was a field test." "A field test for what?" "A network that's been building for years. Senator Roland Wexley isn't just another corrupt politician. He's the political face of a military-industrial complex that wants to federalize local law enforcement through private contractors." Virginia opened a worn leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table: bank statements, communication intercepts, and organizational charts that painted a disturbing picture. The contractor connected to Officer Mitchum's militia group, Sovereign Security Solutions, has been quietly acquiring law enforcement contracts across the South. They provide training, equipment, and what they call cultural consultation to police departments. Adrian studied the financial records. Cultural consultation? Teaching officers to identify and neutralize what they consider threats to traditional American values. High-achieving minorities, military officers who might resist their agenda, community leaders who advocate for reform. They're building a private army within local police forces. Exactly. And Senator Wexley has been using his position on the Armed Services Committee to funnel federal grants toward departments that contract with sovereign security. It's a shadow federalization program that bypasses democratic oversight. The implications were staggering. Adrian realized her arrest hadn't been about racial prejudice alone. It had been a test of the network's ability to target and neutralize specific individuals who posed a threat to their agenda. "There's more," Virginia continued. "The plan includes privatizing military police functions, border security, and eventually federal law enforcement. They're positioning themselves to control the entire security apparatus of the United States." As they talked, Adrian's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from an unknown contact. "Check your secure email. Falcon." Later that evening, in the secure communication center that Owen had set up in a safe house outside Washington, Adrienne accessed the encrypted files from the mysterious contact known as Falcon. What she found made her blood run cold. Falcon had provided audio recordings, financial documents, and communication logs that connected Senator Wexley directly to the network Virginia had described. More disturbing were the transcripts of recorded conversations discussing targeted neutralization of specific individuals, including her name mentioned explicitly. "They've been tracking you for months," Owen said as they reviewed the files together. "Your family connections to Georgia, your travel patterns, even your niece's graduation ceremony. The arrest was planned weeks in advance." One file contained a chilling conversation between Wexley and someone identified only as the General, discussing how to handle the Blake problem after her arrest. "She's too visible now," Wexley's voice said on the recording. "But there are Other ways to handle this: discredit her service record, plant evidence of misconduct, arrange an accident if necessary. The response from the general was equally disturbing. I can handle the military side. She has enemies in the Pentagon who would love to see her brought down. Leave that to me. Adrienne felt a chill of recognition in the voice, though she couldn't immediately place it. Meanwhile, Jeremiah Cole was making his own disturbing discoveries in Atlanta. His investigation into the police union's legal defense fund had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched across state lines. General, what we're looking at is a protection racket that makes the mob look like amateurs, he reported during a secure video call. The same network of attorneys and financial institutions appears in police misconduct cases from Florida to Virginia. Cole had filed a federal lawsuit not just against the Ashwood Police Department, but against the state of Georgia, naming multiple officials as co-conspirators in a pattern of civil rights violations. The lawsuit included Chief Stroud, Senator Wexley, and 2 state senators who had received campaign contributions from Sovereign Security Solutions. They're fighting back hard, Cole warned. I've received death threats. My office has been broken into twice, and someone tried to hack our computer systems. They're not planning to go quietly. The pressure was intensifying on all fronts. Chief Stroud, sensing the investigation closing in around her, had made a desperate attempt to save herself by approaching Adrienne through intermediaries, offering a substantial settlement and a partial admission of guilt in exchange for dropping the federal investigation. Adrienne's response was swift and uncompromising. Chief Stroud, the time for deals has passed. The American people deserve the truth. The rejection pushed Stroud to more extreme measures. Working with contacts in Sovereign Security, she began a campaign to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses, but her desperation led to a fatal mistake. Virginia Cross had been working late in her home office, analyzing financial records that could prove the connection between Wexley and the Shadow Network, when she suffered what paramedics ruled a heart attack. She was found the next morning by her neighbor, having apparently died peacefully in her sleep. But Falcon's latest intelligence drop revealed the truth. Virginia's pacemaker had been hacked and manipulated remotely, causing the fatal cardiac event. The technology existed, and the network had both the resources and ruthlessness to use it. They killed her, Adrienne said quietly, as she and Owen reviewed the evidence. A 72-year-old grandmother who spent her life serving her country. And they'll kill us too if we give them the chance, Owen replied grimly. The message was clear. Anyone who threatened their operation would face consequences, regardless of age, status, or previous service to the country. Despite the mounting dangers, Adrienne decided to use the platform that her notoriety had created. She was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, addressing the newest class of Army officers. Standing at the podium where generals and presidents had spoken before her, Adrienne looked out at the young faces of future military leaders. She thought about her own graduation decades earlier, full of idealism and determination to serve her country. Cadets, you are about to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembly. That oath doesn't come with exceptions for political convenience or personal safety. She spoke about institutional decay, about the difference between loyalty to people and loyalty to principles, and about the courage required to stand up for what's right even when the cost is high. Real patriotism isn't blind obedience to authority, she continued. It's the willingness to hold that authority accountable to the values it claims to represent. You will face moments in your careers when doing the right thing costs more than doing the easy thing. In those moments, remember that your oath is to the Constitution, not to any individual or institution. The speech was broadcast nationally and became a rallying cry for military personnel and civilians alike who were watching the Georgia situation unfold. But it also marked Adrienne as an even greater threat to those who preferred soldiers who followed orders without question. Meanwhile, Officer Ray Mitchum had been trying to disappear since Sharp's death, but his movements were being tracked by multiple agencies. In a twist of irony, he surfaced in a small Virginia town where he was confronted by a group of militia members who had initially seen him as a hero. "You're the cop who stood up to that uppity general," one of them said as they cornered him outside a gas station. But when Mitchum broke down and revealed that he was running from federal investigators, that he was afraid of being arrested or killed, the militia members realized they were dealing with a coward rather than a hero. "We thought you were a patriot," their leader said with disgust. "You're just another scared little man who ran when things got tough." Mitchum fled again, but not before one of the militia members recorded his breakdown and posted it online. The video went viral, showing the man who had humiliated a decorated general crying and begging for protection. Back in Washington, Autumn Blake was making her own impact. Her acceptance into a civil rights internship had brought her directly into the halls of power, where she was documenting the legislative response to her aunt's case in real time. Her social media following had grown to over 2 million people, and her posts about the intersection of military service and civil rights were reshaping public discourse. Young people across the country were organizing rallies and petition drives, demanding accountability for the network that had targeted her aunt. "Justice isn't something you wait for," she posted on her Instagram account, alongside a photo of herself at the Capitol. "It's something you fight for every single day." Her activism had made her a target as well. The attack in Washington, D.C. came without warning. 3 masked men who tried to grab her as she left her internship office. They might have succeeded, if not for Capitol Police Officer Maria Santos, who recognized Autumn from news coverage and intervened. "Stay down," Santos shouted as she drew her weapon, forcing the attackers to flee. The incident made national headlines and turned Autumn into a symbol of young people refusing to be intimidated by those who would suppress their voices. The final revelation in Act 5 came through a hacked video feed that Falcon managed to obtain and leak online. The footage showed Senator Wexley at a private hunting lodge, meeting with Chief Stroud and a third individual whose face was partially obscured, but whose voice Adrian recognized with sickening clarity. "The Blake situation has gotten out of hand," Wexley was saying. "We need to neutralize her before she brings down the entire operation." "I can handle the military side," came the response, in a voice that Adrian now knew belonged to General Preston Kane, her former mentor and commanding officer. "There are ways to discredit her service record, plant evidence of misconduct, make her look like a disgruntled officer with a grudge." "And if that doesn't work?" Stroud asked. Kane's response was chilling. "Then we move to more permanent solutions. Accidents happen in the military all the time." The video exploded across social media and news networks. Public outrage reached a fever pitch as Americans watched elected officials and military leaders casually discussing the murder of a decorated general who had served her country with distinction for nearly 3 decades. The leaked video changed everything. General Harlan Reyes, who had been quietly supporting Adrian's fight, now had the ammunition he needed to take direct action. Within hours of the video's release, he had assembled a task force of military legal experts, internal affairs officers, and intelligence analysts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reyes announced to the assembled team in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon, "we are dealing with a cancer within our own ranks. General Preston Kane has violated his oath, betrayed his country, and conspired to harm a fellow officer. We are going to cut this cancer out." The task force included Colonel Sarah Martinez from Military Intelligence, Major Tom Bradley from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and Captain Lisa Chen from Internal Affairs. Each brought specialized expertise to what would become one of the most sensitive internal investigations in military history. "Sir, Kane still has allies in the Pentagon," Colonel Martinez warned. "He's been careful to cultivate relationships with officers who see this as a political witch hunt rather than a legitimate investigation." "Then we move carefully but decisively," Reyes replied. "We have the evidence. Now we need to ensure it leads to justice." The task force's first move was to place General Kane under discreet surveillance while they built their case. They discovered that Kane had been using his position to access classified information about Adrian's movements and military record, passing details to civilian contacts including Senator Wexley. Meanwhile, Falcon's identity was finally revealed through a carefully orchestrated disclosure. Lucien Graves, a former NSA operative turned whistleblower, emerged from the shadows to provide testimony that would prove crucial to the investigation. Graves had been working within the intelligence community for over a decade, watching the gradual corruption of systems designed to protect American citizens. The network's attempt to silence Virginia Cross had finally pushed him to act. I became Falcon because I couldn't stand by and watch our institutions be perverted by people who put personal power above national security, he explained during a secure deposition. What happened to General Blake was just the beginning. They were planning to expand their operations nationwide. His testimony provided the missing links in the conspiracy, connecting Senator Wexley's political influence with Kane's military authority and the civilian contractors who served as their enforcement arm. Jeremiah Cole was building the legal case that would expose the full scope of the corruption. His federal lawsuit had evolved into a comprehensive civil rights action that named not just the immediate perpetrators, but the entire shadow network that had enabled their actions. "We're not just seeking justice for General Blake," Cole announced at a press conference. "We're seeking to dismantle a criminal conspiracy that threatens the constitutional rights of every American citizen." The lawsuit included financial institutions that had laundered money for the network, contractors who had provided training and equipment for targeting civilians, and politicians who had used their positions to protect criminal activity. But the network wasn't going down without a fight. Kane, realizing that his position was compromised, began destroying evidence and attempting to intimidate potential witnesses. He used his security clearance to access personnel files of officers who might testify against him, looking for leverage to ensure their silence. His desperation led to a confrontation with Major Owen Marks, who had been working closely with the Pentagon task force. Kane cornered Owen in a parking garage outside the Pentagon, attempting to convince him to abandon his investigation. "You owe your life to Blake," Kane said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "But you owe your career to me. I've protected you, promoted you, given you opportunities that others only dream of." Owen stood his ground. "Sir, I owe my loyalty to the oath I took, not to any individual. General Blake saved my life because it was the right thing to do. I'm going to do the right thing for her." Kane's mask of authority slipped, revealing the desperate man beneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes higher than you can imagine. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy your own career and accomplish nothing. Then that's a price I'm willing to pay, sir." The conversation was being recorded by FBI agents who were now working with the Pentagon task force. Kane's attempt at intimidation only added another charge to the growing list of crimes he would face. Chief Barbara Stroud, trapped between federal investigators and her former allies who were now treating her as a liability, made one final desperate attempt to escape justice. Using forged documents and connections within sovereign security solutions, she tried to flee the country through Canada. But Homeland Security had been monitoring her movements since the video leak. She was arrested at the border, her fake passport, and detailed plans for establishing a new identity in Europe, serving as evidence of her guilt and consciousness of wrongdoing. Her arrest broke the last link in the network's chain of protection. Without Stroud's institutional knowledge and Kane's military authority, Senator Wexley found himself exposed and vulnerable. The federal grand jury that Cole had petitioned for was finally impaneled, and subpoenas began flying to banks, contractors, and government offices. The network that had seemed untouchable just months earlier was crumbling under the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. Nia Tucker, who had risked everything to stand up for what was right, was finally vindicated when audio recordings of Mitchum's confessions were played in congressional hearings. Her courage in documenting and reporting the corruption had provided crucial evidence that prosecutors needed to build their case. "I became a police officer to protect and serve my community," she testified before the House Judiciary Committee. "Instead, I found myself working alongside people who were more interested in protecting their own power than serving justice. That's not what law enforcement should be." Her testimony was carried live on national television, and her transformation from a quiet rookie officer to a national symbol of integrity inspired thousands of other law enforcement officers to come forward with their own stories of corruption and abuse. Meanwhile, Officer Ray Mitchum had finally been located by federal agents in a trailer park outside Raleigh, North Carolina. When they arrived to arrest him, they found a broken man who had been abandoned by the network he had served. In exchange for immunity and protection, Mitchum agreed to testify about the full scope of the conspiracy. His debriefing with Owen and FBI agents revealed the systematic nature of the targeting program, including detailed plans to expand operations to other states. "They told us we were patriots," Mitchum said during one session, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said we were protecting America from people who wanted to destroy traditional values. But really, we were just thugs in uniforms, doing the dirty work for people who were too cowardly to do it themselves." His testimony provided the final pieces of evidence needed to connect Senator Wexley directly to the conspiracy. Phone records, financial transactions, and recorded conversations painted a clear picture of a coordinated effort to use law enforcement as a weapon against political opponents. The breakthrough came when Falcon provided investigators with access to encrypted communication servers that the network had used to coordinate their activities. The servers contained years of messages, financial records, and operational plans that documented the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Among the most damning evidence was a conversation between Wexley and Kane discussing plans to expand their targeting program to include journalists, civil rights lawyers, and military officers who had spoken out against corruption. "Blake was just the beginning," Wexley's voice said on one recording. "We need to send a message that nobody is safe if they cross us. Not generals, not journalists, not politicians. Fear is our most effective weapon." The recording was played during a closed Senate hearing where Wexley himself sat on the oversight panel. The look of shock and horror on his colleagues' faces as they heard their fellow senator casually discussing the elimination of American citizens marked the beginning of the end for his political career. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from decrypted files that showed the network had been planning to target Autumn Blake as well. Her growing influence as a youth activist had made her a threat in their eyes, and they had developed detailed plans to discredit or harm her. They were going to plant drugs in her dorm room, Owen reported to Adrian during a secure briefing. Make it look like she was using her platform to hide criminal activity, and if that didn't work, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The files contained backup plans that were far more sinister, including scenarios that would have eliminated both Adrian and her niece simultaneously. The evidence was overwhelming, and the network's desperate attempts to destroy it only added to their legal jeopardy. As federal agents raided offices, seized computers, and arrested conspirators, the full scope of their criminal enterprise became clear. They hadn't just targeted Adrian Blake because of her race or status. They had targeted her because she represented everything they feared: integrity, competence, and unwavering commitment to the principles they were trying to subvert. But their attack on her had exposed their entire operation, and now the full weight of American justice was bearing down on them. The storm that had started with a traffic stop in a small Georgia town was about to reach the highest levels of government, and nothing would ever be the same. The federal courthouse in Atlanta had never seen anything like it. Media trucks lined the streets for blocks while protesters and supporters gathered behind police barriers, their chants echoing off the granite walls. The trial of Senator Roland Wexley, Chief Barbara Stroud, and General Preston Kane had captured the nation's attention like few legal proceedings in recent memory. Special Prosecutor Amanda Richardson had been appointed by the Justice Department, specifically to handle this case. A former federal judge with an impeccable reputation for integrity, she understood the weight of the moment as she addressed the packed courtroom on the trial's opening day. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Richardson began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. "This case is about the corruption of power and the betrayal of oaths. The defendants before you used their positions of trust to target an American citizen because of her race and her willingness to stand up for justice. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Jeremiah Cole, serving as special counsel, presented evidence that painted a clear picture of conspiracy, corruption, and abuse of power that reached the highest levels of government. On the third day of testimony, Adrian took the stand. She wore her dress blue uniform with full honors, her medals catching the courtroom lights as she raised her right hand to be sworn in. The symbolism was powerful, a decorated American general standing before her fellow citizens to seek justice. "General Blake," Cole began gently, "please tell the court about your service to this country." Adrian's voice was steady as she recounted her 27 years of military service, from her early days as a second lieutenant through her rise to lieutenant general. She spoke of deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, of soldiers she had lead and lives she had saved, of the oath she had taken to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. On the evening of May 15th, were you driving through your hometown of Ashwood, Georgia? Yes, I was returning from picking up my niece's graduation outfit when I was pulled over by Officers Mitchum and Sharp. Cole guided her through the events of that night, allowing her to tell her story in her own words. The courtroom was silent as she described the handcuffs, the humiliation, the mockery of her military service. General, during this encounter, did you resist arrest or behave aggressively toward the officers? No, I did not. I remained calm and cooperative throughout, even when they refused to examine my identification or verify my credentials. What went through your mind as you sat in that patrol car? Adrian paused, considering her words carefully. I thought about all the young soldiers I had commanded over the years, and what it would mean to them if I allowed this injustice to stand unchallenged. I thought about the oath I had taken, and what it truly means to defend the Constitution, the fight. Defense attorneys tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she had played the race card for personal gain, that she had exaggerated the incident for media attention. But Adrian's composure never wavered. Counselor, she said to Wexley's attorney, I spent my career in places where playing any kind of card could get you killed. I learned long ago that the truth is the only weapon that matters. The most dramatic moment came when Lucian Graves took the stand. The former NSA operative had spent years documenting the network's activities, and his testimony provided the technical details that connected all the pieces of the conspiracy. Mr. Graves, Richardson asked, how long had you been monitoring the defendant's communications? Approximately 3 years. I first became suspicious when I noticed unusual patterns in surveillance requests targeting civil rights activists and military personnel who had spoken out against corruption. Graves detailed how the network had used government resources to track Adrian's movements, gather intelligence on her family, and plan the traffic stop that would humiliate her. His testimony was accompanied by dozens of documents, recordings, and digital evidence that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. Did you observe any evidence that General Blake's arrest was planned in advance? Yes. I have communications showing that Senator Wexley and General Kane discussed targeting General Blake specifically because of her influence within the military and her family connections to Georgia. The defense tried to discredit Graves as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but his calm professionalism and meticulous documentation made their attacks ineffective. Nia Tucker's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears. The young officer described her transformation from an idealistic rookie to a whistleblower, and the price she had paid for choosing conscience over loyalty to her department. Officer Tucker, Cole asked, what made you decide to record your conversations with Officer Mitchum? I realized that what happened to General Blake wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of targeting people who didn't fit their idea of who deserved respect. Her voice broke slightly. I became a police officer to protect people, not to terrorize them. She described the burning cross on her lawn, the death threats, the isolation within her own department. But she also spoke about finding strength in doing what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The prosecution's final witness was Ray Mitchum himself. The disgraced officer had aged visibly since his arrest, his arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. Mr. Mitchum, Cole said, did you target General Blake because of her race? Yes, Mitchum replied quietly. We were told she was uppity, that she needed to be put in her place. Who told you this? Chief Stroud. She said the order came from higher up, that we were sending a message to people who thought they were better than us. Mitchum's testimony provided the final link in the chain of evidence. He admitted to destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, and participating in a conspiracy that he now understood had threatened the foundations of American democracy. The defense case was weak and desperate. Kane's attorney argued that he was a patriot trying to protect national security from internal threats. Stroud's lawyer claimed she was following orders from federal authorities. Wexley's team insisted he was the victim of a political witch hunt designed to silence conservative voices. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed money flowing from defense contractors to political campaigns. Communication Intercepts revealed casual discussions of eliminating American citizens. Video footage showed the defendants planning criminal acts in their own words. During closing arguments, Jeremiah Cole stood before the jury with the weight of history on his shoulders. Members of the jury, the defendants want you to believe that this case is about politics, about liberal versus conservative, about military versus civilian, but it's not. It's about right versus wrong. It's about whether we will allow people in positions of power to abuse that power against innocent citizens. He gestured toward Adrienne, who sat in the gallery with her sister and niece. General, Blake served her country with honor for 27 years. She earned the right to drive through her hometown without being humiliated and arrested because of the color of her skin. More than that, every American has that right. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with a stack of papers that would determine the fate of some of the most powerful people in America. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant Roland Wexley guilty. The courtroom erupted as the verdicts were read. Wexley, Stroud, and Kane were found guilty on multiple counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. General Kane was additionally convicted of violation of his military oath and misuse of classified information. Adrienne watched the verdicts with quiet satisfaction, tears welling in her eyes for the first time since the ordeal began, not tears of pain, but of release. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had been targeted by the network's corruption. 6 months after the verdicts, Adrienne stood in the Rose Garden of the White House as president. Matthews signed the Blake-Tucker Act into law. The comprehensive police reform bill included mandatory body cameras, anti-extremist screening for law enforcement officers, enhanced whistleblower protections, and federal oversight of departments, with patterns of misconduct. This legislation ensures that what happened to General Blake can never happen again, the president said, as cameras captured the historic moment. It represents our commitment to equal justice under law for all Americans. Adrienne had been invited to stand behind the president as he signed the bill that bore her name. She wore her dress blue uniform one final time, as this would be her last official act before retirement. The ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery 3 weeks later was unlike any retirement in military history. Hundreds of officers attended, as Adrienne was promoted posthumously to lieutenant general, her service record reflecting not just her military achievements, but her courage in standing up to corruption. General Reyes delivered the keynote address. Lieutenant General Blake reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite that fear. She faced down enemies of our Constitution and our democracy, and she prevailed. The ceremony honored not just Adrienne, but all the whistleblowers and witnesses who had risked everything to expose the truth. A special memorial was unveiled recognizing Virginia Cross, Logan Sharp, and others who had paid the ultimate price for their principles. Nia Tucker had found new purpose in the aftermath of the trial. She was appointed to head a new national police ethics board, overseeing reforms in departments across the country. Her transformation from a rookie officer afraid to speak up to a national leader in law enforcement reform inspired a documentary that won multiple awards. I learned that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in that injustice, she said during her acceptance speech at the board's inaugural meeting. We have a responsibility to speak up, even when our voices shake. The police ethics board implemented new training programs, screening procedures, and accountability measures that began transforming law enforcement culture nationwide. Nia's personal story became part of the curriculum, teaching officers that true loyalty meant loyalty to justice, not to corrupt colleagues. Jeremiah Cole's legal career had reached new heights following the trial. He received a presidential commendation for his work on the case and used his newfound prominence to establish the Cross-Sharp Foundation, providing legal aid to whistleblowers and victims of institutional abuse. The foundation, named for Virginia, Cross and Logan Sharp, handled hundreds of cases in its first year alone. Cole's own redemption arc, from corporate lawyer to civil rights champion, inspired a new generation of attorneys to prioritize justice over profit. The law is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it, Cole said at the Foundation's first annual dinner. If we won't stand up for the Constitution when it's tested, then it's just words on paper. Major Owen Marks returned to his intelligence work with a new understanding of his responsibilities. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel and tasked with leading a new unit focused on identifying and preventing domestic terrorism within government institutions. His near-death experience in Afghanistan had taught him the value of life, but his work on Adrian's case had taught him the value of principle. He quietly continued the work that Virginia Cross had started, using his position to monitor and disrupt networks that threatened American democracy. The intelligence unit he led became a model for other agencies, demonstrating how patriotic Americans within the system could work to protect it from those who would corrupt it from within. Perhaps most mysteriously, Lucian Graves disappeared again after the trial concluded. His immunity deal had protected him from prosecution, but it hadn't guaranteed his safety. One morning, Owen found a postcard on his desk with a simple message. "Freedom isn't found in light. It's guarded in shadow." The postcard bore a postmark from somewhere in Eastern Europe, but Owen suspected that Graves was much closer than that. Somewhere in the shadows, the former NSA operative was continuing his work, watching for new threats to the democracy he had helped preserve. Autumn Blake had found her calling in the crucible of her aunt's fight. Her memoir, My Aunt the General, became a best-selling account of how one family's ordeal had exposed a national conspiracy. But more importantly, she used her platform to launch a youth leadership nonprofit called Next Generation Justice. The organization trained young activists in the principles of nonviolent resistance, constitutional law, and effective advocacy. Autumn's speaking engagements took her to high schools and colleges across the country, inspiring thousands of young people to become engaged in protecting democracy. "Justice isn't something that happens to you," she told audiences. "It's something you make happen through your choices and your actions." Her invitation to speak at the United Nations came when she was just 19 years old. Standing before delegates from around the world, she spoke about the power of individual courage to create systemic change. The Ashwood Police Department was permanently disbanded, its officers either transferred to other jurisdictions or dismissed from law enforcement entirely. The building that had housed the department was demolished, and in its place rose the Ashwood Civil Rights Memorial Park. The park featured the names of everyone who had been wrongfully arrested or targeted by the corrupt network, along with the names of those who had stood up to expose the truth. At the center stood a statue of Scales of Justice, with an inscription that read, "Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice served illuminates the path forward." The park became a pilgrimage site for civil rights activists and families affected by police misconduct. School groups visited regularly, learning about the importance of accountability and the courage required to challenge injustice. On a quiet Tuesday morning, 2 years after the trial, Adrian visited Logan Sharp's grave in the Ashwood Cemetery. She placed her Medal of Honor on his headstone, the nation's highest military decoration resting against the simple granite marker. "You tried to do the right thing," she said softly, her words carried away by the Georgia breeze. Now the world knows. Sharp's family had struggled with his death, torn between grief and anger. But the trial had revealed that he had been planning to testify about the corruption he had witnessed, and his attempt to do the right thing had ultimately helped bring justice. His widow had found some peace in knowing that his death hadn't been in vain. The ripple effects of Adrian's case continued to spread. Police departments across the country implemented new policies and training programs. Federal oversight of law enforcement expanded significantly. Political candidates who had taken money from sovereign security solutions found themselves unable to win elections. Most importantly, a new generation of Americans had learned that democracy requires constant vigilance, and that ordinary citizens have the power to hold their government accountable when they find the courage to act. The final scene of this remarkable story took place in a high school auditorium in Detroit, where Adrian had been invited to speak to a gathering of students, teachers, and community members. As she walked onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous and sustained. She waited for the noise to die down, then raised her hand for silence. When the auditorium was quiet, she spoke the words that would define Her legacy. Don't cheer for me, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. March for what's right. The audience erupted again, but this time it wasn't just applause. It was the sound of people who had been inspired to action, who understood that the fight for justice never truly ends. It only passes from one generation to the next. As Adrienne left the stage that night, she knew that her work was done. She had served her country in war and in peace, in uniform and as a civilian. She had faced down enemies foreign and domestic, and she had emerged victorious not through violence, but through the simple act of standing up for what was right. The Mioaz, small-town traffic stop that had been meant to silence her, had instead amplified her voice across the nation. The network that had tried to destroy her had been destroyed in turn, and the principles she had sworn to defend, liberty, justice, and equality under law, had been strengthened by the trial they had endured. In the end, Lieutenant General Adrienne Blake had done exactly what she had trained her entire career to do. She had served with honor, defended the Constitution, and left her country better than she found it. The camera faded to black as hundreds of voices joined together in a chant that echoed through the auditorium and beyond. Justice! 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 And in that moment, the promise of America felt a little more real, a little more achievable, because one woman had refused to be silenced in the face of injustice. What would you do if the very system you'd spent your life serving turned against you because of the color of your skin? And would you have the courage to fight back knowing it could cost you everything? Like and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice.